Against dogmatic decentralization. Functions of bureaucracy are twofold, both the management of resources and of standards and regulations. Resource management is quite varied. It includes both directly allocating land, labor, or raw resources, as well as denying or approving plans. Standards and regulations should be maximally centralized in the long term. Some suggest that allowing for decentralized experiments with regulations and perhaps even standards is sensible. However, virtually everyone agrees that eventually they should be centrally decided. It's worth noting that bureaucracy is not merely in governments. The private sector has a great deal of bureaucracy. Indeed, in the United States, there are far more private bureaucrats than government bureaucrats. Decentralized resource management has several problems. First of all, it's damaging to economies of scale. For example, it should be trivially obvious that each city having its own car factory is absurdly inefficient. It also leads to poor connections between regions, for transport certainly, but also for production more generally. It makes a lot of sense often to build parts in specialized factories and ship them to other places rather than trying to build everything in one location. Decentralized resource management also creates greater opportunities for corruption. It's quite clear that with many more bureaucrats in various locations, they have greater chances to get away with corruption. Worse though, decentralized resource management perpetuates inequalities. Those places with a poor starting point will remain, while those with a higher starting point will continue to compound their advantage. Fundamentally, decentralization increases bureaucracy, even for a set of responsibilities perfectly suited for decentralization. It will at best leave the number of bureaucrats the same. In general, however, it will increase the number of bureaucrats because there will be duplication of work. Instead of centrally deciding something, it must, in several locations, be decided. Decentralization also decreases flexibility, in particular for larger decisions which involve multiple municipalities, or perhaps more generally, local bureaucracies. Decentralized groups of bureaucrats will have to negotiate in order for those larger decisions to be made, which will be slower and harder to overturn. Of course, it's worth noting that decentralization is sometimes appropriate in those cases where resource management, or perhaps even standards and regulation, can be divided into separate locations in a sensible manner. Decentralization can be pursued, or perhaps there's no need to centralize. Decentralized political organizations, like the DSA, are generally incapable of performing the functions of a political organization. In the case of the DSA in particular, the National Committee has absolved itself of responsibility by essentially abandoning any power it ever had, which was quite small to begin with. The DSA also struggles with infighting between high-level party members in public. Challenges of centralization. Incompetence is not much of a problem. After all, there's no real reason to believe incompetent bureaucrats are more likely to get to higher level positions than competent ones. It is worth noting that there may be some phenomenon that there is more variance in centralized systems, because if by chance an incompetent bureaucrat gains a higher level, they will be able to do more damage. Of course, in reality, under any sensible system, competent bureaucrats are more likely to reach higher positions, so incompetence is more of a problem for decentralization. Corruption. Firstly, decentralization is not a cure for corruption. That said, it can be a challenge for centralized organizations. There are some mitigating factors, however. Fewer individuals means less work for oversight organizations. In general, it can be observed that higher level officials get away with corruption less often, though their corruption is, of course, more damaging. Centralized organizations also have less organizational redundancy than decentralized ones, though this is simply a byproduct of the fact that decentralized bureaucracies are larger. Redundancy can be implemented at the cost of a larger bureaucracy, if so desired. Transparency and oversight. Centralized organizations are the only ones which are even capable of meaningful transparency. Only in a centralized organization could there be enough real information being distributed that the public at large have a way of grappling with it and understanding the operations of the organization. Oversight comes in two forms: laws and oversight organizations decoupled from the running of the parent organization. All long-lasting organizations have oversight mechanisms. In fact, they have both oversight mechanisms. These laws are generally enforced by secret police, not just government police, though necessarily, like the FBI, but large bureaucracies like Google will hire private security firms to protect their secrets and perform other anti-corruption activities. Oversight organizations is less well defined. Congress and the board of directors for corporations are oversight organizations, though quite different certainly. In general, these organizations tend to take actions when previously mentioned laws are violated, and while certainly important, are often varying in degrees of effectiveness. Finally, it's worth noting that ideology can mitigate corruption and tyranny within bureaucracies, often much better than oversight. Decentralized organizations have serious problems, with all kinds of problems that societies face quite frequently. Take, for example, any problem of the commons, like that of a river, with many dependent municipalities along its length. If all the management of the river is decentralized to those municipalities, how will they decide in a fair and democratic manner how the water can be used and how waste can be put into the river? One possible case is that the largest municipality will impose its will upon the others. Another possibility is, and this is essentially the best case scenario, is long multi-party talks which come to a rigid but vaguely fair agreement. This brings us to my final point. Decentralization is anti-democratic. First, it's worth defining democracy, since everyone has their own definition. Democracy is when people have proportional votes in decisions relative to the impact the decision has upon them personally. Of course, this is completely impractical. At least I don't know any way to honestly collect the information on how much a decision affects any individual. So it's perhaps more practical to say that everyone who is affected in some way by a decision has a say in it. Decentralized organizations, unless they are tightly constrained around responsibilities relating to a single location, will make decisions which affect other locations. The people from other locations will have had no say on those decisions.